I took a deep breath as I surveyed my family's faces gathered around the mahogany dinner table. Darwin, my husband, Dan, my father, Amber, my mother, and Greg, my elder brother, had all assembled for what was referred to be a family gathering. The spring rain was still falling softly outside, and the droplets that trickled down the window panes produced an odd symmetry with the tension within the room. I squeezed my hands beneath the table as my fingers began to shake. My name is Stacy Taylor. Though I'm well past my mid-30s, whenever I return to my parents' house, I'd always feel like I'm 18 again. I looked at the wall of old family photographs in the living room and saw that most of them featured Greg's accomplishments, such as his football victory in high school, his graduation from college, and the success of his first real estate transaction. All of them were on full show. However, the only images I have are of Greg standing next to me, or of the family as a whole. I work for an architectural design business, but I seldom ever brought up my profession when I spoke with my parents. Rather, Greg's most recent business triumphs and his next big transaction usually took center stage in chats. Is there something urgent? I asked. A meeting this sudden is pretty unusual. Dan cleared his throat and exchanged a glance with Amber. My father, now over 70, seemed to have shrunk slightly from the strong build he once had. He had been a strict and stubborn man, but in recent years he had softened. At least that's what I had thought. We wanted to talk about estate planning. I raised an eyebrow. My parents were in good health and had rarely spoken about death or inheritance before. Across the table, Greg wore a confident smile. His expensive suit and watch were a clear display of his supposed business success. As we get older, we realize it's important to clarify what we have. Amber continued quietly, her voice carrying tension as if her usual composed demeanor was faltering. We don't have a large estate to leave behind for you two, Dan stated bluntly. Our main asset is this house, and after we pass away, we've decided that this house will be inherited by Greg. A dull ache spread through my chest. What Dan was saying wasn't true. I knew my parents had inherited a substantial estate from my grandparents, not just in cash, but also a lakeside vacation home. And yet, they had decided to leave nothing for me. All my life, I had been compared to my brother Greg. One of my clearest memories was from when I was 10 years old at the school science fair. I had spent weeks preparing a project on urban planning and sustainable architecture. Even my science teacher had been impressed by how precise and well-crafted it was. Greg, on the other hand, had only started his project the night before the fair. He built a basic volcano model, something straight out of a textbook. On the day of the presentation, I won the grand prize and earned a spot at the state competition. Greg didn't even receive a participation award. When we got home, I rushed to show my parents my trophy, but in the living room, Greg had already captured their attention. It's really too bad things didn't go well, Greg, my mother Amber said as she gently stroked his hair. But next time it will definitely go better. That's right, Greg, Dan agreed. You're really smart. You were just too busy with baseball, piano, and cram school. I stopped in front of the door, suddenly feeling the trophy in my hands grow heavier. With a bright smile, I pushed open the door and said, "Look, I won the grand prize." For a moment, my parents looked at me. "Oh, I see," Dan said. "That's good." Then he turned back to Greg. "Greg had a chance to go to the state competition too," Amber said. "He's actually much better at science than you are." And so, my trophy was placed in the corner of the living room shelf. Meanwhile, Greg's participation medal for baseball was displayed in the center. As the state competition approached, my parents neither helped me practice nor bought me any additional materials. I prepared alone, and my school teacher was the one who took me to the venue. I won the state competition, and a small article about it even appeared in the local newspaper. But that same weekend, Greg's baseball team placed third in the regional tournament. That was all my family talked about at dinner. My success was dismissed as just good luck. By the time I reached high school, the gap had only grown wider. I graduated at the top of my class. won an award in a national architectural design competition, and received scholarship offers from top-ranked universities. Meanwhile, Greg had above-average grades and was admitted to the local state university on a sports scholarship. Greg has a natural talent for business, my parents insisted. Amidst such a life, the only solace I had was my grandfather. Every summer, I would visit the lakeside vacation home with him. My parents and Greg often stayed behind, but for me, those visits were heaven. My grandfather would spend hours looking at my architectural sketches, giving me advice, and truly appreciating my talent. "You have a special eye, Stacy," he would always say. "You can see the soul within buildings." The summer I was 13, while my parents were attending Greg's regional baseball tournament, I stayed at the vacation home with my grandfather. That weekend, he took me to a local architectural exhibition. For the first time, I saw the works of female architects. "Look, Grandpa, women can design such amazing buildings too." My grandfather smiled gently. "Of course, Stacy, and you can do the same. In fact, you'll create something even more remarkable." On the way back, he said to me, "The view from this vacation home is my treasure." He continued, "This house is filled with precious memories of you and me. One day, it will be yours." A few years later, the summer I was 17, it was the last summer I spent at the lakeside vacation home. My grandfather's health was deteriorating, but he still made time every day to look through my sketchbook. "One day, you will design magnificent buildings," he would say. One quiet evening at dusk, as we sat together on the pier, he took my hand. "Remember this, Stacy. You don't need to be compared to anyone. You shine with your own light." Just a few days before he passed away, in a weak voice from his hospital bed, he quietly said, "One day, make that vacation home your place." I still vividly remember the reading of his will after his passing. He had given clear instructions that his estate was to be divided fairly among the entire family. Where had that promise gone? I asked. That doesn't make sense. What happened to the assets Grandpa left behind? What about the lakeside vacation home? My voice trembled slightly with frustration. You must have inherited a significant amount of cash along with it. Grandpa told me he wanted me to have that vacation home one day. Amber's expression darkened for a brief moment. Her eyes flickered toward Greg, as if some unspoken signal had passed between them. That money is for our retirement, Amber answered defensively. If you ever need help in the future, Greg will be there for you. She clenched her hands together and looked toward Dan instead of at me. It felt like a rehearsed response. I turned to my brother. Greg wore a smug smile. He placed his wine glass on the table and leaned forward. Don't worry, Stacy. If anything happens, I'll take care of you. The authoritative tone in his voice made my face flush with anger. He had already discussed this with our parents before the family meeting. I had been excluded. It was presented as a done deal. I can't trust that promise. Besides, I am perfectly capable of taking care of myself. I said, my breath coming faster. I have a solid career and income at the design firm. I don't need Greg's charity. Darwin and I drove home in silence. The heavy rain pounded against the windshield, mirroring the turmoil inside my head. The modern house we lived in was my very first architectural project. When we decided to build a home after getting married, Darwin had believed in my talent and entrusted the entire design to me. This house carried my heart and soul. A house my parents had never once visited. They never cared about me. They're too busy visiting Greg's new condominium. I muttered bitterly as I stepped inside. I turned on the living room lights and slipped off my shoes. Then, suddenly, I burst into tears. Darwin said nothing. He just held me. Can you believe it? They're leaving everything to Greg. Even the lakeside vacation home. Everything is going to him. I finally voiced it. Grandpa wanted his inheritance to be shared equally between us. Darwin gently kissed my hair. After 7 years of marriage, he understood this deep pain of mine, the struggle of constantly seeking my parents' approval, the suffering of living in my brother's shadow. Maybe we should look into this, he said, sitting on the sofa and handing me a cup of tea. If there was an official will, there must be a record of it somewhere. The next day, I couldn't focus at work. Even in the middle of meetings, my thoughts kept drifting back to my parents' betrayal. During lunch, I called my college friend Nicole. Nicole was a well-known family law attorney. Of course, if the will is a public record, I can look it up, Nicole said, and also the property deeds. Give me a few days and I can find out. I spent the next few days in anxious anticipation. At night, I was haunted by nightmares. In one dream, the lakeside vacation home was sinking in a flood, and as I called out to Greg for help, he only stood on the shore laughing. And every morning, after waking from those nightmares, I would always recall the time I cared for my mother after her injury. 3 years ago, my mother had fallen down the stairs and fractured her leg. She was bedridden for 5 months, unable to walk. She couldn't manage anything around the house. During that time, I visited my parents' home almost every day. Since my mother couldn't climb the stairs, I remodeled the first floor living room into a bedroom for her. I drove her to and from the hospital, prepared dinner, and managed her medication. Greg only called occasionally to say he was concerned. At the time, my parents seemed grateful for my efforts, but now I realized that it was nothing more than an illusion. A few days later, Nicole called me, followed by an email confirming my worst fears. "Look at this," I said with trembling hands. I showed the documents to Darwin. Attached to the email was an official copy of the will and the real estate records. A will had already been made. The house, the vacation home, the savings, the insurance money, everything goes to Greg. I have been left with nothing. Darwin stared at the screen, his eyes darkening with anger. He too had a strong sense of justice. "When was this made?" he asked quietly. 3 years ago. Right after my mother fractured her femur, I answered bitterly. And then my eyes widened at the date. When I was visiting the hospital every day, helping around the house, when Greg was barely involved at all. That bitter sense of betrayal spread through me. Even after she was discharged, I was the one helping my mother, managing her medication, and taking care of the household so she could recover. Nearly every day, I put my own work on hold to visit my parents' house, prepare frozen meals, do house repairs, and tend to the garden. Meanwhile, Greg only called occasionally, saying he was too busy with work. Even his rare visits, just a few times over several months, were met with gratitude from my parents as if he had made some great sacrifice. It's as if everything I did meant nothing. I sighed as if I were just a housekeeper. Darwin took my hand. They're just trapped in their own values. Greg is the eldest son and a man, so I know I cut him off. They cherish Greg just because he's a man, but we are both their children equally. They're just hiding behind their own bias. That night, I couldn't sleep. For the next few weeks, I kept my contact with my parents to a minimum. I kept my responses brief when they called and repeatedly declined Sunday family dinners, saying, "I'm busy with work." That was true, but it was only part of the reason. I wasn't ready to face their betrayal. At work, I turned my anger into energy. My designs became bolder and more innovative than ever, impressing clients. My colleagues were surprised by my sudden focus, but Darwin understood. I needed something to prove not to my parents, but to myself. One evening when Darwin came home from work, he was more excited than usual. He loosened his tie, took a bite of the pasta I had made, and poured himself a glass of wine. "Listen to this, Stacy," he said in a low voice. "There's a major development project happening in your parents' neighborhood. Within a few months, the value of that land will double." I set down my fork. Woodland Hills? That area hasn't changed in decades. "That's about to change," Darwin leaned in. The city council passed new zoning laws. Mixed developments and high-rise buildings will now be allowed. Investors are already making their moves. "How do you know this?" I asked. Darwin was a real estate developer and had been successful in property investments, but he shouldn't have had any specific knowledge about my parents' neighborhood. After a brief hesitation, he admitted, "Actually, my group is involved in the project," he confessed. "I hadn't told you, but I'm a key member of the investment group working on this." Darwin had been part of major projects before, but this one directly affected my childhood home. At first, it was a coincidence. A month ago, the plan was still in its conceptual stage. When the project started taking shape, I realized it included your parents' neighborhood, he explained. I should have told you right away, but I know how complicated things are between you and your parents. I didn't want to drag you into it. He turned back and met my eyes. But lately, I felt like something was off. Ever since your parents suddenly announced that Greg would inherit everything. As I looked into things further, I found something else. Greg is buried deep in debt, and I think he's been pushing your parents to sell the house. What? I exclaimed in shock. Greg's company is supposed to be successful. He told me he earns hundreds of thousands of dollars a month. Darwin shook his head. On the surface, it might look that way, but someone in my investment group has worked with Greg before. His real estate business has been running at a loss for years. He's been borrowing money just to maintain his image. Your parents' house could be used as collateral for his debts. I stood up and paced the room. So that's why I was cut out of the will. If the house belongs to Greg, he can do whatever he wants with it. It's a possible scenario, Darwin agreed. But we can't be certain. The next morning, I woke up with my decision made. I'm going to see my parents and ask for the truth, I told Darwin. But before I could make the call, my phone rang. It was Amber. Stacy, I need to talk to you. Her voice was unsteady. It's about the house. All right, Mom, I said. I'll come over. That afternoon, I headed to my parents' house. As usual, I greeted them at the door, showing the familiar courtesy I had practiced for years. To my surprise, not only were Dan and Amber there, but Greg was also in the sitting room. He looked uneasy, his usual confident demeanor noticeably absent. Stacy, thank you for coming, Dan said. We have something important to discuss. Amber held a teapot in her hands and placed a fragrant cup of tea in front of me. We've decided to sell the house, Amber suddenly announced. We received a good offer, and well, it's too big for us now. I set my cup down and stared at my parents. Since when have you been planning this? Recently, Dan answered, but his eyes didn't meet mine. Like he had done for years, he rubbed his palm over the old wooden table. This is something Greg and we decided together. So this was Greg's idea? I asked directly. A heavy silence fell over the room. My parents exchanged anxious glances. Greg cleared his throat and straightened his posture. Stacy, listen to me, Greg began, using the tone of someone negotiating a deal. The property value in Woodland Hills has increased by 30% over the past 5 years. This house is too big for our parents and costs a lot to maintain. If they sell now, they can enjoy a comfortable retirement. Right, but this was your suggestion, wasn't it? I pressed. Of course. I'm a professional. I understand market trends. Greg puffed out his chest. So what? I glanced at the papers left on the table beside the sale contract bearing a real estate company's logo. There were bank loan documents. I picked them up and flipped through them. This is a mortgage refinancing document. Why would they need a new loan if they're selling the house? I asked. Dan looked up nervously. Greg said they needed to renovate the house first to increase its value, and this loan would cover that cost. I turned to Greg. So you're having our parents take out a loan against their home under the guise of renovations? Don't put it like that, Greg snapped, raising his voice. This is just a business strategy. With renovations, the selling price will increase by over $100,000. And who's handling the renovations? I pushed further. Greg fell silent. Amber answered instead. One of Greg's business partners. He's offering a very reasonable price. I let out a sigh. Darwin's suspicion was correct. After returning home, I explained the situation to him. They're going to sell a house. Greg must have convinced them because of his debt. That's probably the case, Darwin agreed. But there is still a way to stop it. How? The house is set to go up for auction in a few weeks, he explained. We can buy it. We don't have that kind of money, I said. We do, Darwin said. My company has been very successful. If we see this as an investment. I thought about it for a long time. Then I made my decision. Thank you, Darwin. Let's do it. On the day of the auction, Darwin and I attended in disguise. The bidding was intense, and the price skyrocketed. But in the end, we won. A few days later, I called my parents and Greg. I want to have a family meeting tomorrow night at the house, I told them. The next day, Dan, Amber, and Greg gathered in the living room. They looked uneasy. What's going on, Stacy? Amber asked. You've been acting strange lately. I have something to say, I said, pulling out an envelope filled with documents. Darwin and I were the ones who bought your house at the auction last week. The room fell silent. What? Greg shouted. That's impossible. It's possible. Here's the proof. I took out the property deed. This house is mine now. Why would you do such a thing? Dan asked, his voice shaking. I know why you were in such a hurry to sell this house, I said calmly. Greg, you wanted to sell before the property value increased so you could cash out. You were using our parents to pay off your debts. Greg's face turned pale. That's a lie. Is it? I pulled out another set of documents. Here's the proof of Greg's debt. Darwin's company analyst found it. He owes a significant amount to the bank and was planning to use this house as collateral. My parents looked stunned. Greg, is this true? Amber asked, her voice trembling. Mom, Dad, Greg was planning to use the house to cover his debt. He's on the verge of bankruptcy. Don't lie, Greg shouted, standing up. My husband investigated your financial situation, I said calmly. The bank records show that your company has over $3 million in debt. Your credit is ruined. That's why you were trying to use our parents' house to secure new funds. Amber placed a hand on her chest, looking at Greg with a worried expression. There are ups and downs in business, Greg said defensively. I'm just dealing with a temporary cash flow issue. Dan buried his face in his hands. You lied to us. It's not a lie, Greg shouted. It's strategic information management. I just didn't want you to worry. I delivered the final blow. And out of the proceeds from this sale, how much would actually go to our parents? Wouldn't most of it be used to pay off your debts? The color drained from Greg's face. Of course they would get a fair share. How much? I pressed. Greg didn't answer. His silence said everything. There's one more thing you should know, I continued. Darwin is a key investor in the development project for this area. That's how we knew the house was being put up for sale. And I also knew that he removed me from the will. If you had followed Greg's plan, Mom and Dad would have been drowning in debt instead of enjoying their retirement. Amber started to cry. Dan looked utterly exhausted. Stacy, not now. I raised my hand, cutting off my father's words. I'm not planning to demolish this house. Instead, Darwin and I have revised the development plan to preserve the house while redeveloping the surrounding area. I revealed the modified blueprint of the development plan. But there are conditions. What conditions? Dan asked. First, a new will must be created, dividing all assets equally between Greg and me. Second, I must have an equal say in family decisions. And lastly, the family photo wall should celebrate not just Greg's achievements, but mine equally. Greg's face turned red with anger. As he stood up, I won't be blackmailed like this. This isn't blackmail, I replied calmly. I'm simply asking for fairness. If you refuse my conditions, I will demolish the house and proceed with development. If that happens, you'll have nowhere to live. Dan and Amber exchanged glances. After a long silence, Dan let out a deep sigh. All right, he admitted quietly. We have been unfair to you. We'll accept your conditions. Greg stormed out in fury. Amber approached me crying. I'm sorry, Stacy, she sobbed. We were wrong. I maintained my composure as I replied. I hope we can build a different relationship from now on. When I returned home, Darwin was waiting. How did it go? They accepted the conditions, I said. but I still couldn't sort through my emotions. They apologized, but I don't know if it was truly from the heart. Maybe it was just for their own sake. It will take time. Darwin put his arm around my shoulder. I nodded. The following week, my parents signed a new will under the supervision of a lawyer. I was given equal decision-making rights in family matters and in the living room, where only Greg's achievements had been celebrated for years. New photos were added: my graduation, my promotions, and the professional awards I had received. 1 year later, I sat at the table reviewing the documents laid before me. While watching the rain begin to fall outside the window, Darwin placed his hand on my shoulder and gently asked, "Are you okay?" "Yes, I just think it's ironic," I said. On the table lay Greg's latest financial report. His company had completed its bankruptcy proceedings, and several of his assets had been seized by creditors. Since that day, he had been crushed under the weight of his debts. The luxury condominium, the expensive cars, and the glamorous lifestyle he had worked so hard to maintain were all gone. Now he lived in a small suburban apartment, drove a used car, and was practically blacklisted from the real estate industry. I muttered, "He's finally facing the consequences of his actions, deceiving our parents, cutting me out of the inheritance, and trying to use the house as collateral." Since then, I had barely spoken to my parents or Greg. I wasn't ready to reconcile until I was certain they had truly changed. Instead, Darwin kept occasional contact. Dan started working part-time as a consultant for an old colleague's construction company. Amber is working at a local restaurant. Darwin updated me. I felt a pang of disappointment, wondering if they were still trying to rescue Greg even now. Dan claims it's to instill accountability in Greg. They wish to teach him how to make money on his own rather than hand it to him. That caught me off guard. My parents were teaching Greg to deal with reality rather than pampering him, and for the first time, they appeared to genuinely comprehend the problem. Darwin went on, "It looks like Greg is also changing. He started taking night classes in business management at the local community college, and on weekends, he's working at a friend's construction site." I made my way to the window. I hope he truly learns and changes. The fact that I had at last found my voice was more important than whether or not they would ever really change. I had yearned for my family's acceptance for years. I realized now that I didn't require it. Darwin and I had created a great life, and now I felt strong enough to pursue my goals. One of the happiest days of my life was the day I signed the mortgage documents. My name is Emily, and I finally had a place of my own at the age of 30, away from the never-ending turmoil from my sister Melissa and the incessant criticism from my parents. The very following weekend, however, I got Buddy, a golden Labrador with profound brown eyes, who instantly warmed my heart when I met him at the shelter. That was the true icing on the cake. With the same justification dogs are filthy, they shed, and they destroy furniture, my parents had always rejected my requests for a dog. Every time I pleaded or pledged to handle everything myself, the response was invariably a resounding no. Instead, I used my passion for animals to volunteer at the local shelter, where I spent every Saturday during high school cleaning kennels and walking dogs. As Buddy showed me about my new apartment and his new house, I felt a sense of fulfillment that I had never had before. His tail was wagging excitedly as he explored his surroundings, and he was always grinning. We quickly established a pattern that included weekend excursions to the dog park, nightly training sessions, and early walks before work. I immediately put him in professional training sessions because I wanted to provide him with the greatest life possible, not because he was misbehaving. "You've got yourself a smart one here," his trainer Mark told me after the first session. "Quick learner, eager to please." I beamed with pride. Yeah, he's pretty amazing. 3 weeks after bringing Buddy home, I decided it was time to introduce him to my family. I was nervous but hopeful that they'd see how well-behaved and loving he was. Maybe they'd even understand why I'd wanted a dog all these years. The moment I walked through my parents' front door with Buddy on his leash, I knew it was a mistake. My mom's face scrunched up like she'd smelled something rotten. My dad crossed his arms defensively, and Melissa, my 25-year-old sister, who still lived at home, rolled her eyes dramatically. "You actually brought it inside," Mom said, stepping back as if Buddy might attack her designer shoes at any moment. "His name is Buddy, and yes, I brought him inside. It's February and freezing outside," I replied, trying to keep my tone light despite the immediate tension. Dad glanced at Buddy, who was sitting perfectly at my side, just like we practiced. "Well, don't let it on the furniture. Your mother just had the couches cleaned." "He won't," I said, giving Buddy a gentle pat. He looked up at me with those trusting eyes, completely unaware of the cold reception he was receiving. We moved to the kitchen, where Mom had prepared lunch. Buddy laid quietly under the table near my feet as we ate, not making a sound. "So, Melissa," Mom started, her voice immediately warming, "tell Emily about your promotion." Melissa straightened up, her face brightening. "Yeah, my boss practically guaranteed I'll get it. Just a couple more weeks, and I'll finally be able to afford my own place, a place where I can live however I want without constantly having to check with Mom and Dad about everything." The irony wasn't lost on me. She complained about our parents' control while still living under their roof and following their rules at 25. "Well, we're very proud of you," Dad said, beaming at her. Then, as if remembering I was there too, he added, "Emily's doing well with her mortgage payments." Right before I could answer, I felt Buddy shift under the table. Melissa let out a dramatic yelp. It touched me. "Get it away," she shrieked, pushing her chair back. "He just wanted to say hello," I explained gently, guiding Buddy back to my side. "He's friendly." Mom shook her head firmly. "Emily, I think it's best if you don't bring the dog when you visit in the future. Your sister's clearly uncomfortable, and frankly, so are we." I looked around the table at their disapproving faces, feeling a familiar disappointment settle in my chest. Nothing had changed. I was still the odd one out in this family, and now Buddy was too. "We should get going," I said, standing up abruptly. "I have some errands to run before evening." As I drove home with Buddy sitting calmly in the passenger seat, I realized something had shifted. For years, I tried to please my parents to fit into their expectations. But now, with my own home and Buddy by my side, I finally had the freedom to live on my own terms. "Just you and me, Buddy," I said, reaching over to scratch behind his ears. "And honestly, that's all I need." Over the next few months, my visits to my parents' house became less frequent. When I did go, it was only when my friend Tara could watch Buddy for a few hours. Every time, the conversation inevitably turned to Melissa, her career, her plans, her dreams. It was always the same script, with me playing the role of supportive older sister, while feeling increasingly disconnected from my family. During one such visit, Melissa pushed past me in the hallway, her face pinched with frustration. "Promotion fell through," she muttered. "Boss said maybe next quarter." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said sincerely. "These things happen. There'll be other opportunities." She leaned against the wall, her eyes drifting to my car keys in my hand. "You're leaving already? You just got here." "I need to get back to Buddy. Tara has plans tonight." Melissa scoffed. "That dog, you act like it's your child or something." "He's family to me," I said simply. She shook her head, then looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "You're lucky, you know that? Your own place, making your own rules, must be nice." I didn't know what to say to that. It was nice, but it wasn't luck. It was the result of years of saving, planning, and working hard, things Melissa never seemed interested in doing. Life settled into a comfortable routine with Buddy. Morning walks, work at the marketing firm, and his excited greeting when I returned home. Our weekends were filled with dog park visits and lazy evenings together. Then, on a Tuesday, my boss called me into her office. "Emily, I have an opportunity for you," she said, sliding a folder across her desk. "We're opening a new branch in Colorado, and we need someone to go set it up 2 months on site to train the new team." I scanned the details. The assignment looked challenging but exciting. "This would be a significant step up in your career path," she continued. "If you handle this well, we're looking at a promotion when you return. I need to figure out a few things, but I want this opportunity. I told my boss. Can I give you a definite answer tomorrow? That evening, I researched pet hotels, but the thought of Buddy staying in a kennel for 2 months broke my heart. He'd been in a shelter before. I couldn't bear him feeling abandoned again. The next day, there was a knock at my door. Melissa stood in the hallway, shifting uncomfortably. Mom said you weren't answering her calls, so she sent me to check on you. She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. Buddy trotted over to greet her, and she absent-mindedly pushed him away when he tried to sniff her hand. Why are there suitcases out? She asked, pointing to the luggage I'd pulled from storage. I explained about the business trip, watching her eyes light up with interest as I mentioned the potential promotion. So, what's the problem? Sounds like an amazing opportunity, she said, flopping down on my couch. It's Buddy. I don't know where he'll stay while I'm gone. Melissa looked at Buddy, who had retreated to his bed. Something shifted in her expression. She offered. Suddenly, I stared at her, not sure I'd heard correctly. But you don't even like dogs, I said. She shrugged. I could stay here in your apartment. It would give me a break from Mom and Dad, and you wouldn't have to put him in some kennel. I hesitated. Something didn't feel right about this sudden change of heart. But I was running out of options. There would be rules, I said firmly. No parties. Keep the place clean. Buddy needs 2 walks a day. His food is measured out. I'll show you how much. Got it? Got it, she interrupted, rolling her eyes. I'm not a child, Emily. The day of my departure arrived too quickly. Melissa showed up with 2 large suitcases, looking more like she was moving permanently than pet sitting. Remember, Buddy's dinner is at 6, and he gets these dental treats before bed, I explained as I waited for my taxi. And please, no parties. Everything will be fine, Melissa said, pushing me toward the door. Go be successful. Buddy and I will have a great time. I knelt down to hug Buddy, feeling a lump in my throat. Be a good boy. I'll miss you so much. The taxi honked outside. I gave Buddy one last pat, shot Melissa a warning look, and left. The first week in Colorado was a whirlwind of meetings and setting up systems for the new office. Every night, I texted Melissa for updates on Buddy. She always replied with brief messages. All good here, or Buddy's fine. Stop worrying. Occasionally, I managed to video call her, and seeing Buddy's face on screen, hearing his excited bark when he recognized my voice, eased my anxiety. By the 3rd week, I'd settled into a routine. The new team was enthusiastic, and I found myself enjoying the challenge. Melissa's updates continued, always positive, always brief. Then, late one evening, my phone rang. It was Mrs. Patel, my neighbor from the apartment next door. Emily, dear, I hate to bother you, she began, her voice tied with annoyance. But there's been quite a disturbance from your apartment these past few nights. Loud music, many people coming and going, and I'm concerned about your dog. He's been barking and crying a lot. It doesn't sound like he's happy. After thanking Mrs. Patel, I immediately called Melissa. She answered on the 4th ring, music pulsing in the background. Hello, she shouted over the noise. Melissa, what's going on? Turn down the music. We need to talk. The music grew fainter. What's up? It's kind of late here. I just got a call from my neighbor. She says you've been throwing parties and Buddy's upset. Your neighbor is exaggerating, Melissa scoffed. We had a couple of friends over, that's all. And Buddy's fine. Show me the apartment, I demanded. Right now. Video call. The call switched to video. Red plastic cups littered my coffee table. There were people visible in the background, and the living room was a disaster zone. Where's Buddy? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. The camera panned to show Buddy huddled in the corner of the kitchen, looking anxious. Get everyone out now and take Buddy for a walk, a proper one. She rolled her eyes but nodded. Fine. Everything will be back to normal tomorrow. Stop overreacting. I hung up and immediately called my parents, hoping they might talk sense into Melissa. But as soon as I explained the situation, I realized my mistake. You're making a mountain out of a molehill, Emily, my mother said dismissively. Melissa's just enjoying a little freedom from us for once. She promised to take care of Buddy. And she's breaking that promise. I insisted. It's just a dog, Dad chimed in. And frankly, you've always been too uptight. No wonder you don't have many friends. The comparison stung. Could you at least check on her, make sure she's keeping the place decent? You're being controlling, Mom said. Melissa will be fine. Don't call us with these petty complaints again. They hung up, leaving me seething with frustration and worry. I should have known better than to expect their support. As always, Melissa was the golden child who could do no wrong. The days following my confrontation with Melissa blurred together. I threw myself into work, trying to ignore the constant worry about Buddy in my apartment. Every morning, I checked my phone for Melissa's daily text, always some version of everything's fine, and tried to believe her. Over the weekend, I tried calling Melissa for a video chat. I missed Buddy terribly and needed to see his face, to hear him bark with excitement when he recognized my voice. Sorry, he can't talk right now. Walking Buddy, read her text response to my call. I tried again that evening. Making dinner. Call tomorrow. Tomorrow came, and again, excuses. By Monday, I was getting suspicious. This pattern continued for days. Whenever I tried to see Buddy on video, Melissa always had a reason why she couldn't show him. Send me a picture of him, I texted her directly. Hours later, a photo arrived. Buddy lounging on my couch, looking happy and relaxed. I felt a momentary relief until I took a closer look at the image. The light coming through the window suggested early morning, not evening, when she sent it. I scrolled back through my text history, finding earlier photos she'd sent. There it was, the exact same image sent 3 weeks earlier. She was recycling old photos. My heart raced as panic set in. Why would she send old pictures unless something was wrong with him? Shaking hands, I dialed Mrs. Patel's number. Hello, Emily, she answered, sounding less irritated than during our last conversation. Hi, Mrs. Patel. I'm sorry to bother you, but I need to ask about my dog. Have you seen Buddy recently? Heard him barking. There was a pause that made my blood run cold. Now that you mention it, I haven't heard your dog in at least 2 weeks. The parties have continued, though they're quieter now, but no barking. No dog sounds at all. I thanked her and hung up, my mind racing with terrible possibilities. Where was Buddy? What had Melissa done? I immediately texted my sister. I need to see Buddy. Video call. Now. The message showed as read, but no response came. I called again. Straight to voicemail. I left a message, my voice trembling with a mixture of fear and rage. Melissa, I know you're lying about the photos. Call me back immediately and show me Buddy, or I swear I'll call the police and report him stolen. Hours passed with no response. I couldn't concentrate on work, couldn't eat, couldn't think about anything except Buddy. The night passed in a sleepless blur as I checked my phone every few minutes, hoping for a response that never came. By morning, I knew I couldn't wait any longer. I called my boss, my fingers trembling as I dialed. Jenna speaking, she answered on the second ring. It's Emily. I need to go home, I blurted out. It's an emergency? Emily, what's wrong? My boss sounded concerned. I explained the situation as calmly as I could, though I could hear my voice cracking. I think something's happened to my dog. My sister won't answer my calls, and my neighbor hasn't seen or heard him in weeks. I understand you're worried, but we're in the middle of this project, she said gently. Could you wait until the weekend? I shook my head, even though she couldn't see me, tears threatening to spill. I know this project is important for my career. I know I'm risking my promotion, but Buddy is family to me, and I can't sit here doing spreadsheets when he might be. I couldn't finish the sentence. There was a long pause on the other end, then a sigh. I had a dog growing up. If I were in your shoes, I'd do the same thing. Another pause. Go. You've already accomplished most of what we needed anyway. We can handle the rest. I booked the first flight I could find, packed my bags in a frenzy, and headed to the airport. By the time my plane landed, it was nearly midnight. I took a taxi straight to my apartment, rehearsing what I would say to Melissa. The fury that had been building inside me for the past 24 hours had crystallized into something cold and hard. As the taxi pulled up to my building, I could hear music from the third floor, my floor. Great. Another party. I paid the driver, grabbed my suitcase, and marched up the stairs. The music grew louder as I approached my door. The scene that greeted me was exactly what I'd expected. About a dozen people sprawled across my living room, drinking from red cups, my furniture pushed against the walls to make space for dancing. The air reeked of alcohol and cigarettes. I dropped my suitcase with a thud, walked to the speaker system, and yanked the plug from the wall. The sudden silence made everyone freeze and turn toward me. "Part's over," I announced, my voice steady despite the rage boiling inside me. "Everyone out now." There were confused murmurs, but something in my expression must have conveyed that I wasn't to be argued with. People began gathering their things, filing past me with awkward apologies and averted gazes. Melissa emerged from the kitchen, her face registering shock when she saw me. "Emily, what are you doing here? You're supposed to be in Colorado. Where's Buddy?" she demanded, ignoring my question. I glanced around nervously as the last of her guests left. "Buddy's not here right now," she said. "I can see that," I said, stepping closer to her. "Where is he, Melissa?" Something in her expression changed. A flicker of vindictiveness crossed her face. "Fine. You want to know where your precious dog is," she sneered. I got tired of him. He wouldn't stop barking whenever we had people over. He was ruining all my fun. My heart dropped. "What did you do?" I asked. "I took him to a shelter," she said, her voice cold. "He was a pain in the ass anyway." The world seemed to stop. I stared at my sister. This person I'd grown up with, now a complete stranger to me. In that moment, I hated her with an intensity that frightened me. "Get out," I whispered. "Pack your things and get out right now, or I swear I'll do something we'll both regret." The moment she was gone, I collapsed onto the couch, exhaustion and fear washing over me. Buddy was in a shelter somewhere, but which one? There were at least a dozen in the city. I pulled myself together and grabbed my phone. It was past midnight, far too late to call any shelters, but I could email them. I drafted a quick message describing Buddy. Golden Labrador, male, 3 years old, microchipped, with my contact information, and sent it to every shelter I could find online. Sleep was impossible. I spent the night cleaning up the mess from Melissa's party and trying not to cry every time I came across one of Buddy's toys. By morning, I was running on coffee and anxiety. I started calling shelters the moment they opened. The first 4 had no record of a dog matching Buddy's description. The 5th call changed everything. "Yes, we could have a lab brought in about 2 weeks ago," the woman on the phone confirmed. Female said it was a stray she found, but he had a microchip. "We've been trying to contact the owner, but the phone number listed goes straight to voicemail." "My old number," I said. "I changed it 6 months ago and updated it everywhere except apparently Buddy's microchip registry." "That's my dog," I said, my voice breaking. "His name is Buddy. I'm Emily Weber. I can come right now with proof of ownership." "We close at 5, the woman said kindly. "He'll be waiting for you." I thanked her profusely, grabbed my purse and car keys, and rushed out the door. The shelter was on the other side of town, a 30-minute drive that felt like hours. All I could think about was Buddy, scared, confused, wondering why I'd abandoned him. When I arrived, I practically ran to the front desk, identification and adoption papers in hand. The staff verified my information and led me to the kennel area. And there he was, curled up in the corner of a cage, looking smaller somehow. His coat had lost some of its shine, and he didn't immediately look up when we approached. "Buddy," I called softly. His head snapped up, ears perking, the moment of recognition. His eyes locking with mine will stay with me forever. He jumped to his feet, tail wagging so hard his whole body shook, and let out a joyful bark that echoed through the shelter. The staff member opened the cage, and Buddy bounded into my arms, licking my face, whimpering with happiness. I hugged him tightly, tears streaming down my face, whispering apologies he couldn't understand, but somehow seemed to forgive anyway. After completing the necessary paperwork to reclaim him, we walked out of the shelter together. Buddy stayed pressed against my leg the entire drive home, as if afraid I might disappear again if he lost contact. Back at the apartment, I gave him a thorough bath, checked him for any health issues, thankfully finding none, and fed him his favorite food. That night, he slept in my bed, something I'd never allowed before. But rules seemed less important now than keeping him close. The next morning, my phone rang. It was my mother. "Emily, we need to talk about what happened with Melissa," she began without preamble. "She's very upset." "She's upset." I laughed incredulously. "She abandoned my dog at a shelter and trashed my apartment." "Don't be so dramatic. It was just a silly dog, and she was only having a little fun with her friends," my mother said dismissively. "You need to apologize for throwing her out with nowhere to go." Beside me, Buddy rested his head on my lap, looking up with those trusting brown eyes that had kept him waiting for me at the shelter. This was the final straw. "No," I said firmly. "I'm not apologizing. Buddy is family to me, even if you don't understand that. And until Melissa takes responsibility for what she did, and until you and Dad stop making excuses for her, I don't want to hear from any of you." My mother gasped. "You don't mean that. You choose a dog over your own family. I'm choosing to surround myself with beings who respect me and who I can trust," I replied, surprising myself with my calmness. "Right now, that's not you, Dad, or Melissa. Goodbye, Mom." I hung up before she could respond, my heart racing but my mind clearer than it had been in years. For so long, I tried to meet my family's expectations, to be the daughter they wanted. But in that moment, I decided to be the person I needed to be for myself and for Buddy. The following weeks weren't easy. My parents and Melissa called and texted repeatedly, alternating between guilt trips and angry accusations. I blocked their numbers. I needed space to heal, to rebuild the trust that had been shattered not just between Buddy and me, but my trust in my own judgment. Work was a welcome distraction. My boss was understanding about my early return, and though I hadn't completed the full 2 months in Colorado, she was impressed with what I'd accomplished in the time I was there. The promotion we discussed came through, bringing with it a welcome salary increase that I immediately put toward a doggy daycare service for the days I couldn't work from home. A new rhythm was established in life. Buddy befriended Max, a German shepherd, at the dog park one Saturday morning. I started talking to David, Max's owner, while Buddy and Max were playing. After exchanging phone numbers before we left the park, our frequent get-togethers at the dog park quickly evolved into coffee dates and dinner dates. David loved Buddy just as much as I did, and he was considerate and nice to be around. Melissa wrote to me 6 months after the shelter incident. Although there were still some justifications in it, the apology was genuine enough that I could see she had given it some thought. She admitted that she had hurt Buddy in addition to me. She just stated that she wanted me to know that she recognized the wrongness of what she had done, without pleading for my pardon. I didn't answer right away. I needed time to think things through and choose whether I wanted to allow her to return to my life in any way. There was no need to expedite that choice.